Ahoy, it's Lydia here from the Simpsons Theory. Last year, when my channel only had a cute number of 2K subscribers, I made a series of videos counting all the kills in the Treehouse of Horror series, and although I am proud of them, I think I've come a long way since then. So, over 100,000 subscribers later, I've decided to re-record the entire series. And do not worry, I've learned from my mistakes too, adding in any kills I missed out last time, as well as clarifying why I didn't include others.
To get me, you'll have to go through your fault.
Making the final kill count so much higher and so much better. And no, it's not just my counting that's improved, I've also even picked the brains of former writer and showrunner for season 7 and 8, Bill Oakley, dissecting what it was like for writing and overseeing the Treehouse specials in production. Therefore, I've added tons of behind the scenes trivia throughout the video, examining the evolution of these spooktacular specials. You can find all the rules in the description, as well as timestamps for each section, if you wanted to skip to a certain Treehouse of Horror. The Treehouse of Horror specials span over 30 years and about 800 hours or so in length. As such, there are a lot of beheadings, mutilations and disembowelments for you all to really sink your teeth into, you sick sickos. So in the words of Dead Meat James, let's get to the kills. I'm Lydia and this is the ultimate Treehouse of Horror kill count. The first Halloween special aired 31 years ago in 1990, and it has been an annual event ever since. The idea was inspired by EC Comics, which made Tales of the Crypt and Vault of Horror. Producer Mike Rice said, "It was an experiment, but then the whole show was an experiment then." He later mentioned that the Treehouse specials take 3 times the amount of design work than a regular episode, and that it's brutally hard on the animators as everything's got to be redesigned. This is because each segment requires them to create new clothing, backgrounds, and props, while in regular episodes, the characters wear the exact same clothes every single time.
Seems like I've been wearing the same red dress forever.
Although it's tough on the animators, the writers absolutely love the Treehouse specials. When asking Bill how it was to write the Treehouse episodes during our interview, he said,
"I would say that it's more fun and it's easier because the thing about regular episodes is you got to have a story that lasts the whole 3 acts. Like we had so many stories that were just an act and a half. In the Halloween shows, you only have to have a 1 act. The story doesn't have to have any emotional resonance. The characters don't have to behave like the characters. And furthermore, the episodes can be, sometimes it can just be a direct parody of the thing, which is easy to do.
The first Treehouse special opens with Marge talking to us, the audience, pre-warning us of the horrors that lurk within the next 20 minutes or so. This confrontation indicated straight away that this episode would go against the grain of the typical Simpsons episode.
"I would have to pull out your tongue."
This piece was a sincere effort to warn young viewers, as the producers felt it was somewhat scary and a bit of a risk to broadcast.
But tonight's show, which I totally wash my hands of, is really scary.
Marge will repeat this announcement again only a handful of times going forward before it's dropped completely. Like all advice from our mums, it was ignored anyway and was a burden to write.
Well, if you didn't listen to me last time, you're not going to now.
We then cut to Bart and Lisa telling each other scary stories in the treehouse, which is where we get the name Treehouse of Horror, but the rest of the series abandons this storytelling method right after this. The first segment is an Amityville horror parody entitled Bad Dream House. When the Simpsons family move into a creepy new house, they become possessed and adopt violent tendencies. And it looks like we're about to have our very first kill as we see Homer, Bart, Lisa and Maggie brandishing weapons in a bid to murder each other. But luckily Marge, ever the voice of reason, snaps them out of their homicidal state. She tells the house off, stating that since they are living there, it has to play nice. Now deep in thought of whether or not to live with the Simpsons or to commit suicide, it decides that the latter is far more preferable and so implodes into nothingness. So, the very first Treehouse of Horror death was a house. A sentient house with feelings, thoughts, and opinions.
Make the walls bleed.
No.
Hey man, we own you. Let's see some blood.
Therefore, a worthy number on our kill count, and you can't tell me otherwise.
You can't help but feel a little rejected.
This segment is then followed by Hungry Are the Damned, a parody of the Twilight Zone's To Serve Man. Now there are no deaths here, however it does introduce the alien duo for the first time, Kang and Kodos,
Greetings, Earthlings. I am Kang.
who have since appeared in every single Treehouse of Horror episode since. The final story is The Raven, a retelling of the classic poem by Edgar Allan Poe, read by Darth Vader himself, James Earl Jones.
Perched and sat, and nothing more.
In the story, Homer reads a book to forget about his lost lover, Lenore, otherwise known as Marge. It appears that she died a long time ago, so for this reason, I'm not counting this as a kill. This was originally going to be a fairly straight recreation of the Edgar Allan Poe poem, but Matt Groening wanted a little bit more Bart in it, so the writers added Raven Bart by saying,
Quoth the Raven.
Eat my shorts.
ending Treehouse of Horror with one, yes, just one kill. The early specials relied more on atmosphere, story, and tension rather than straight out bloody murder. As the series goes on, they get bloodier, gorier, and more insane. Those poor animators must have gone through a whole lot of red ink. Treehouse of Horror 2. Instead of starting this special off in a treehouse, the Simpsons instead experience nightmares after eating too much candy. This is known as a wraparound, a framing device to tell each story. These wraparounds would eventually be dropped in Treehouse 5 due to time constraints. Fun fact, this is the first Treehouse of Horror to have the cast name changed to something spooky, a tradition that continues to this day. Matt Groening's rule for the scary names is that it can't be longer than the person's real name, but much like Marge's sage advice before, this would be ignored largely by everyone else. There are 3 segments in this special, but only one has any kills. In the story, If I Only Had a Brain, the creators dip their toes into the pool that is blood, guts, and gore by killing a couple of their characters, and they soon get a real taste for it. After Homer is fired for sleeping on the job, he becomes a gravedigger. And what does he do on the job? He sleeps. While out looking for a brain to use in a robot, Smithers and Burns finds a passed out Homer in a grave, and they take him to remove his brain and place it into the robot. After the robot turns out to be just as lazy as Homer, they put the brain back where it came from. But after its removal, the robot topples on top of Mr. Burns, crushing his already decrepit body. And while both Homer and Burns are later revived, they were still technically killed. Ending Treehouse of Horror 2 with 2 kills. Treehouse of Horror 3. Now this episode had to go under almost 100 line changes, so much so that the challenge of making these specials got so difficult, some producers even considered cancelling the Treehouse of Horror series right after this one. But thankfully, they were overruled, and so the Treehouse of Horror specials became an institution and a staple in the cartoon zeitgeist. This episode's wraparound is the Simpsons family telling creepy stories at a Halloween party.
But I've got a story so scary you'll wet your pants.
Too late.
The first segment is Clown Without Pity, but there's no kills here.
Ooh, that's bad.
But it's still one of my favourite Treehouse of Horror segments ever.
That's good.
But as there is no kills, we'll have to move on.
That's bad.
In King Homer, a parody of King Kong, Marge joins Mr. Burns and Smithers on an expedition to Ape Island to find the legendary King Homer. While trying to take down the big ape, he quickly gobbles up poor Lenny.
Oh no, not Lenny! Not Lenny!
Smithers does manage to sedate him, but not before being eaten himself. After being taken to New York, next up on the menu is Shirley Temple, after being swallowed by Homer. Fun fact, when Temple was asked to voice herself in the season 11 episode Last Tap Dance in Springfield, she told the producers in no uncertain terms to F off. Perhaps she still had hard feelings about being eaten alive. Anyway, after the photographers and their flashes anger King Homer, he breaks free and stamps on one. The last person to be munched on in this segment is Marge's father, Clancy Bouvier, which probably explains why he disappeared. The next segment is Dial Z for Zombies. Bart finds a mysterious book in the library in the occult section and resurrects the dead. While in the cemetery, the Pet Cemetery, there are tombstones reading Fish Police, Capital Critters, and Family Dog, which were all short-lived animated series. And as we all know, the Simpsons creators like to throw a bit of shade from time to time. To make things simple, I'm only counting the zombies we recognize as kills, because many of the zombies were already dead for decades or centuries, such as Einstein and Shakespeare. Upon waking, the zombies look for their first meal, and Neddy, ever the love thy neighbour guy, welcomes the undead into his house, and his reward being a tasty snack for his guests. Zombie Flanders is later shot by Homer, but I'm only counting this as one kill.
Dad, you killed the zombie Flanders.
He was a zombie?
Many of the Springfieldians slowly transform into zombies, including Principal Skinner. Feeling a bit peckish, he calls Martin Prince into his office, telling him to bring that big juicy chess club brain with you. Now I wasn't sure whether or not to count Martin's death, as he doesn't die on screen, and we don't see him as a zombie either. He is a clever guy after all, and he's got a big, juicy, delicious brain. And whether or not Skinner ate it or not, that is up for debate. Next up is Krusty the Clown, who is dragged into a box with Sideshow Mel. We also see zombie Jimbo, Dolph, and Kearney kick around the dismembered head of Skinner. Edna Krabappel is the last zombie Springfieldian we see in this segment. The final count for Treehouse 3 is 13 kills. Treehouse of Horror 4. The special starts with a reference to Rod Sterling's Night Gallery, and these wraparounds were written by the former Simpsons writer Conan O'Brien. The first segment is The Devil and Homer Simpson. There are no kills here, but there are plenty of nightmarish imagery when Homer gets sent to hell. Next up is Nightmare at 5.5 Feet, a parody of the Twilight Zone episode Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. This segment was written by Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein. The Twilight Zone was a huge inspiration for the show's writers, with many segments based on the show.
In the writer's room, there was a book, Twilight Zone Companion, that had all the episodes of Twilight Zone listed. They had already done several by season 5 or whatever it was. And we were always just leafing through it and wondering, like, okay, which ones are the famous ones that people remember? Could we do a parody of that?
Bart has a nightmare of the school's bus crashing, killing everyone including himself. As I am including dream sequences, I will add these kills to the counter, which is 19 people on the bus, and one for the truck driver too. After waking up from this awful nightmare, Bart gets on the bus and is understandably shaken, and his dreams come true when he spots a gremlin on the side of the school bus. He warns Otto, but he mistakes Poor Hans Mole Man for the gremlin, running him off the road. This shriveled up prude of a man manages to stop his car just in time before smashing into a tree, but then his car suddenly blows up, which probably still isn't as bad as getting hit in the groin by a football. Beneath the surface too, this is a really clever joke, as Mole Man is actually driving an AMC Gremlin car. Now accused of being crazy, poor old Bart is tied up to the German student Uta. Now Uta is a pretty special guy, being the first and only human character to be introduced in the Treehouse of Horror, who has also made it into the canon series too. Originally conceived as a one-time joke, he's been a reoccurring character ever since.
Don't make me run! I'm full of chocolate!
Although there was that mystery at the Civil War Reenactment Museum. Bart finally manages to throw the monster off the bus with a flare, where he's found by Ned, who showers the gremlin with love. And how does the creature repay his kindness? By slicing off his head and showing it to Bart. We're starting to learn the flaws of Ned's love by neighbor mantra. Poor old guy.
Oh, isn't that cute? He's trying to claw my eyes out.
The next segment is called Bart Simpson's Dracula. In the story, a bunch of characters are bitten and turned into bloodthirsty vampires. However, I am not counting vampires in this kill count, as they are the undead and can be killed later. Such as Mr. Burns, who after being impaled in the crotch is staked through the heart and turns to dust, but not before firing poor Homer.
You're fired!
Rounding Treehouse of Horror 4 to 23 deaths. Treehouse of Horror 5. This is the last Halloween special to feature a cemetery opening. As you probably know, the previous special featured tombstones with humorous names engraved on them. This may be because they ran out of ideas, seeing as the only tombstone featured here reads, "Amusing Tombstones." This is also the first treehouse not to feature wraparounds. This was to allow more time for the main stories. Despite these changes, this is the highest rated Treehouse of Horror on IMDb with 9.2 out of 10, and it's one of my absolute favourites too, with some of the most memorable segments.
David Letterman!
Hi, David. I'm Grandpa.
It's also the bloodiest too. Executive producer David Merkin tried to cram in as much blood and guts into the special as he could.
Usually the blood gets off at the second floor.
This was because Merkin was riled up from the Congress complaints regarding the amount of violence in the show. He later called it the most disturbing Halloween show ever, which is pretty punk rock. As no more than a few seconds into the opening, Moe drops down from a tree, having hung himself. Patty and Selma are then burned at the stake. Skinner is decapitated by a guillotine and his head falls into a basket, along with Edna's, Willie and Wiggum's. So that's 7 deaths before the episode has even begun. The first segment is the shinning.
You mean shining?
Shh! You wanna get sued?
When Homer goes something something,
Go crazy?
Don't mind if I do!
he chases his family with an axe, but no TV and beer can do that to you. Willie arrives to help but receives an axe in the back for his troubles. This is personally one of my favourite segments, as the Kubrick classic goes down as one of my favourite films of all time. Matt Groening, however, had never seen the movie, and so most of the references were entirely lost on him. Next up is Time and Punishment. Homer builds a time-traveling toaster that takes him to the prehistoric times, but he soon finds out that something as menial as killing a bug or even sneezing has extreme repercussions. By altering the past, he creates a series of alternative universes, each more bizarre than the last. Although it can't be too bad to live in a world that rains donuts. In that universe, Lisa announces that Patty and Selma have died, but we can assume that these deaths happened quite a bit before the happenings of this episode, as Lisa announces that they're going to their funeral. So, sorry Homer mate, they're not going on to the kill count.
No!
In one of these futures, Willie warns Homer that he's not in his world, but before he can say any more, Maggie comes along and impales him in the back with an axe. Again. In a deleted scene, it was going to be revealed that Homer had a teenage son named Roy. The joke was later used as a subplot for the episode The Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie Show, although Roy was just a lodger in that episode, rather than a son.
How's the hanging, everybody?
Morning, Roy.
Yeah, hi, Roy.
Finally, there's Nightmare Cafeteria, one of the bloodiest segments so far. Overcrowded and underfunded, the teachers realise that they can kill 2 birds with 1 stone by butchering the students and serving them up as lunch meat. The first victim on the menu, Jimbo Frickin' Jones, who is made into some delicious burgers.
Are you saying you killed Jimbo, processed his carcass and served him for lunch?
And poor Uta is cooked into frankfurters. We see the other children locked in cages waiting to be put on the chopping block, but I can't count these kills because there's no slicing and dicing happening. The Scotsman once again tries to rescue the children, but is met with, you guessed it, yet another axe in the back. The poor guy just can't catch a break. While evading the drooling teachers, Bart, Lisa and Milhouse are herded towards a giant blender, which they soon fall into. This all turns out to be a dream, but the kill count still stays. Upon waking, Bart isn't free from his nightmare as gas leaks into his bedroom and turns the Simpsons family's skin inside out. However, this doesn't kill them as they then proceed to perform a singing, dancing number until Santa's little helper comes along, grabs Bart by pink, fleshy muscles and drags him off the stage to be eaten like a delicious sausage. So much for man's best friend, eh? Treehouse of Horror 5 ends with 16 kills. Treehouse of Horror 6. And not to be outdone by the previous opener, the episode starts out with the Simpsons family hanging themselves in the living room. In Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesores, Homer steals the giant donut from Lard Lad. After being struck by lightning, he and the other giant advertising figures come to life. Angered, the walking mascot and his friends decide to destroy the town. A neon Duffman cowboy begins his slaughter by crushing 7 people with a giant bottle. And a couple are swallowed by Professor Peanut. While reporting on this, it looks like Kent Brockman is eaten, but we actually do see him later on in the episode, so hold your horses. When the town's basketball captain leaves a shop, Chief Wiggum guns him down, mistaking him for a mascot. Even when Homer gives Lard Lad back his donut, it doesn't stop him from kicking poor little Santa's little helper into oblivion. Now, last time I didn't count regular animal deaths as, well, to be honest, it could get pretty confusing. But a lot of you felt that Snowball and Santa's little helper should be counted as they are much a part of Springfield as the Simpsons family are. So let's add that poor old pooch to the kill count. When Lisa and Paul Anka perform to distract the people from paying attention to the mascots, they begin to die one by one. As they are technically alive, I am counting their deaths. The next Treehouse 6 segment is Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace, an excellent parody of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Groundskeeper Willie is terrorizing the kids of Springfield in their dreams after being burned alive. Which reminds me, while Martin takes a victory lap after finishing his test early, Willie strangles the nerd to death with his tongue. A parody of the gross tongue scene in Nightmare. The Simpsons kids manage to stop him by plugging his bagpipe hole with a pacifier, where he expands and explodes. He's technically already dead, but I'm counting it again, as Willie just can't seem to catch a break, and these deaths need to count. Regarding to this, former writer Bill Oakley stated, "I know the Groundskeeper Willie as Freddy Krueger segment did indeed scare a lot of people, mainly kids who hadn't seen Nightmare on Elm Street, and how they had bad dreams about it. In retrospect, I don't think I'd have toned it down, but I do feel a bit bad about terrorizing all those children." Finally, we have Homer cubed, and we have no deaths here, but it was the first Treehouse of Horror episode to use CGI, and it came out a month before Toy Story.
This place looks expensive. I feel like I'm wasting a fortune just standing here.
The CGI was well done by computer animation company PDI, who would later go on to create Shrek, How to Train Your Dragon, and Kung Fu Panda. It is personally one of my all-time favourite segments, ending Treehouse of Horror 6 with 26 kills. Treehouse of Horror 7. The showrunners for Treehouse 6 and 7 were Josh Weinstein and Bill Oakley. Oakley said, "You are allowed to go way outside the bounds of what we normally were allowed to do, both in terms of gore and scares." Dying during the couch gag seems to be a reoccurring theme, as the Simpsons family die immediately upon seeing the Grim Reaper. There are 3 segments in this special, but only one has any kills. In the segment, Citizen Kang and Kodos come to Earth. With an election happening, they kidnap Bill and Bob and take on their forms to manipulate America. When Homer tries to save the pair, he accidentally shoots them into space. Duh! After the election, Kang and Kodos enslave the human race, but don't blame me, I voted for Kodos. The Simpsons writers are masters of political commentary, so even though this aired in 1996, this will always be timeless.
It's a 2-party system. You have to vote for one of us.
So the death count for this one is pretty low, with only 7. Treehouse of Horror 8. So this episode starts off with a Fox censor covering the Simpsons script and deleting scenes. As he proudly talks about cutting the episode to a TVG, a hand with a sword appears out of the on-screen rating icon and stabs him in the back repeatedly. No doubt this is something the Simpsons creators always wanted to do to real censors. Right after this, the Simpsons rush to their couch before being immediately executed. This segment, the Omega Man, has the biggest kill count so far. Insulted by Mayor Quimby's frog joke, France launches a bomb to Springfield, where it obliterates the town's population. According to Simpsons Wiki, the population of Springfield is estimated to be around 50,720. But I won't be counting this insane number because who knows who was in or out of town that day. So instead, I've painstakingly counted each skeleton I see. They're things I do for you guys. So after combing through every scene, I counted 78 dead Springfieldians. And man, I really need to get a life. Another person who needs to get a life is Comic Book Guy, who just before he dies exclaims,
"Oh, I've wasted my life."
And apparently this is one of Matt Groening's favourite lines in the entire show. But as it turns out, a handful of Springfieldians manage to survive the blast and decide to confront Homer.
You want me? Come and get me!
Get him! Down!
During their getaway, Homer runs over Johnny and Edgar Winter, mistaking them for zombies. Homer arrives home and is surprised to find his family alive and well. The 6 mutant survivors burst into their home, but are blasted with shotguns. In Easy Bake Coven, Luann Van Houten, Agnes Skinner, and Elizabeth Hoover are accused of witchcraft and burnt at the stake. Fun fact, Kang and Kodos appear in every single Treehouse of Horror episode, but their brief appearance in this one was nearly cut.
What the hell was that?
But David X. Cohen managed to persuade the producers to leave this scene in. So, Treehouse of Horror 8 ends with 95 dead people, which is the most kills so far. Treehouse of Horror 9. During the opening, the Simpsons get a bit clumsy. Bart trips over the car and breaks his neck, Lisa's bike knocks into Bart's body, and she crashes headfirst into the wall. And then Marge runs into Homer, killing him instantly. We then cut to Freddy Krueger and Jason on the couch waiting for the family. In a fun fact, Freddy was voiced by Robert Englund himself, the murderous dream invader from the Nightmare on Elm Street films.
I don't get it. They should be here by now.
In Hell to Pay, Homer receives a hair transplant from the recently executed Snake. His new lavish hair possesses him, encouraging him to go on a murderous spree. His first victim, Apu Nahasapi Mapetalon, who he stuffs into his own squishy machine.
Jeez, Lou, how long are we gonna let me keep drinking this thing?
He then corkscrews Moe's beating heart out of his chest in a scene that was supposed to be even more gruesome. But personally, I think seeing a beating, pulsating heart on a corkscrew is already pretty dark. But do not worry, the possessed hair does get his comeuppance in the end, and is shot several times in a scene reminiscent of Chucky's death in Child's Play. Now last time, I didn't count this as a death because, well, it's hair. But a few of you commented that it should have been counted, so go on there, let's add that to the kill counter. It won't be a real kill count without the psychopathic duo Itchy and Scratchy. In the terror of Tiny Toon, Bart and Lisa are transported into their TV. The kids witness the blue mouse slicing off the cat's head before scooping it out and making it into a cat-o'-lantern. And Poochie the rocking dog is also run over by Itchy and Scratchy soon after. His second death after dying on the way back to his homeworld.
I have to go now. My planet needs me.
Bart and Lisa manage to escape the murderous cat and mouse and jump into their world, where they land into a live episode of Regis and Kelly. Now in this scene, the soup splash was created by dropping an item into the pot before editing the animated characters over the top of it. The final segment in Treehouse 9 is Starship Poopers. Maggie is going through all the typical pains a typical baby goes through, like sprouting tentacles.
He's entering the terrible twos, all right.
While in her cot, she transmits a signal into outer space, where it's picked up by Kang and Kodos. In this shot, we can see that the frequency waves are emanating from Louisiana. The running gag throughout The Simpsons is Springfield's true location, which changes from episode to episode.
Dad, you're not pointing anywhere near Springfield. It's over here, Apu. Hey, what you doing?
Sometimes it looks like it takes place in Illinois, other times in Oregon, and in the movie it can somehow be found within the 4 border states:
Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky.
And in one recent episode, it's shown to be a completely fictional state. So if you want to hear more about Springfield's true location, then I made a whole video on this very topic, which I've added in the description for you guys to watch after this video. Anyway, as it turns out, Maggie is the daughter of Kang. When the alien duo come to Earth, they take part in the Jerry Springer Show. Kang disintegrates an audience member before wiping out the entire audience. And then the host is strangled by Kang. Rounding off Treehouse of Horror 9 with 70 kills. Treehouse of Horror 10. This episode's couch gag features callbacks to the previous Treehouse of Horror episodes. When Lisa asks, what do aliens have to do with Halloween, she is disintegrated by Maggie's ray gun.
Silence!
Obviously sticking up for her dad and her family. In I Know What You Diddly Iddly Did, the Simpsons run over Ned Flanders and believe they killed him. However, I won't be counting this death, as it turns out that he didn't really die because he was recently bitten by a werewolf.
You can't kill the undead, silly.
But I will count Homer's death, as Werewolf Flanders mauls him viciously. It's possible that Homer turns into a werewolf too, but judging from the sound of his skin tearing and munching sounds, Ned most likely ate him. In Desperately Zening Xena, comic book guy, also known as the Collector, kidnaps actress Lucy Lawless for his collection.
I simply wish to take you back to my lair and make you my bride.
Oh dear God!
Along with his other captives, Doctor Who, actress Yasmin Bleeth, Gilligan from Gilligan's Island, and Spock, and 7 of 9. After a confrontation with a super-powered Bart and Lisa, the Collector falls into a vat of lucite, but also manages to strike an awesome pose before being consumed by the liquid.
Best death ever!
The last segment, Life's a Glitch, Then You Die, Y2K strikes, causing all appliances to malfunction, including Dick Clark, who turns out to be a robot and melts to death. As the chaos ensues, the spinning needle tower breaks off and flies 15 people into space. And the machines go wild. The Simpsons family even sees Krusty get killed by his own pacemaker. And it's here that they find an invitation to fly to Mars. With the world about to blow up, Lisa, Marge and Maggie manage to hitch a ride to Mars, whereas Bart and Homer aren't so lucky, sneaking onto another rocket ship that contains a whole lot of C-list celebrities with a one-way trip to the sun. These people include Tonya Harding, Courtney Love and Rosie O'Donnell.
No, Rosie O'Donnell!
And so Homer and Bart eject themselves into space, where their heads expand and explode. Now, I was unsure whether or not to include these C-list celebrities in the kill count because we don't technically see them die. But seeing as it's a foregone conclusion, let's add them to the tally. The total kill count for Treehouse of Horror 10 is 51. Treehouse of Horror 11. The episode starts with a parody of the show The Munsters, with the family dressed up as the iconic characters from the show. But they are soon attacked by an angry mob, leaving only Lisa alive. In Ghost Dad, Homer chokes on a piece of broccoli. And this is why you shouldn't eat your vegetables, people. Like Dr. Nick says, stick to your neglected food groups. Homer rises to heaven, but in order to get through those pearly golden gates, he has to do one good deed. So he is sent back to Earth as a ghost to accomplish this task. Only for Homer to eat yet again another broccoli and die.
I tried the broccoli again.
He starts his task by trying to help Agnes across the road, only to drop her on oncoming traffic. The next segment is Scary Tales Can Come True, and it's an amalgamation of various fairy tale classics, such as Little Goldilocks, who upon waking is mauled by 3 bears. And then there's Rapunzel, but after a hefty Homer tries to climb her lovely long luscious hair, he ends up tearing it right out of her scalp, which I imagine most probably killed her. When Bart and Lisa are kicked out of their house because their parents couldn't afford them anymore, they come face to skull with their older dead siblings.
Face it, they're not great parents.
But I won't count these characters as they are already dead, and being skeletons, we can only assume that they've been dead for a long time. Bart and Lisa then find a gingerbread house where they're invited inside by Suzanne the Witch, but she intends to eat the children, first by fattening up Bart.
Well, at least stop basting yourself.
But before she can kill them, she is pushed into the oven and cooked alive. And poor old Sue, she didn't even get to go on a date with George Cauldron. The final segment, Night of the Dolphin, goes down as one of the bloodiest and perhaps oddest so far. This segment is a parody of the 1973 movie The Day of the Dolphin, where Dr. Jake Terrell trains his dolphins to speak and learn English. Sick of being mistreated by the humans, the dolphins have finally had enough, and they plan to take over the world. They start their invasion by beating Lenny, who was only enjoying some late night drinking in the sea.
Not Lenny!
Their slippery fiends then rip the captain right in half. Afterwards, they begin their march on Springfield, decapitating the squeaky-voiced teen in the process. Ken Brockman is then beaten to death by a dolphin with a beach ball. And the dolphin then proceeds to kill the cameraman. And you know what? I bet Arnie Pie was so bloody pleased to be in the sky that day. Anyway, Grandpa Simpson is then eaten alive by a dolphin. So I guess it's true what he said.
I was born in this nursing home and I'll die in this nursing home.
While at the town meeting, a dolphin smashes through the window, impaling poor groundskeeper Willie. With the town now fed up with the deadly dolphins, they decide to plan a battle, and Comic Book Guy's neck gets broken by repeated slams with a car door. When we zoom out during the fight, we can spot 5 dead bodies. And there are also 6 dead dolphins, but seeing as I don't normally count animals unless they are characters, I won't be counting the dolphins today. But if you do disagree with me, then go ahead, feel free and add 5 to the kill count. After an intense battle, the Springfieldians lose and are sent to live in the sea. We then see Krusty the Clown laying face down in the water, having drowned. His floating corpse then joins the other 49 bodies to form the words "The End." This gives Treehouse 11 with a high body count of 73. Treehouse of Horror 12. This was the first Halloween special since the first, where the creators didn't have any scary names in the credits. This was apparently due to the September attacks on the 11th, as the staff wanted to be sensitive. However, according to producer Al Jean, the scary names were dropped because they were too difficult to come up with. But I guess there are only so many ways you can put a pun into your name. The episode starts with Smithers putting up Halloween decorations, only to fall and slide into the fuse box where he is electrocuted. We then cut to the Simpsons family trick-or-treating, where we see Homer dressed up as Fred Flintstone. The creators actually had Fred Flintstone in mind when creating Homer. They were even going to make Barney Gumble his neighbor instead of Ned. Barney Rubble, Barney Gumble, Rubble, Gumble, Barney Bunny. I'm sure you get it. But the family see the mansion on fire and flee in terror. They run through Mr. Burns' extremely sharp fence, slicing them up like salami. In Hex in the City, Homer is cursed after insulting a fortune teller, and a hex is put on him and everyone he loves.
Whatever.
So Marge grows a beard and Bart's neck becomes long and stretchy, to the point where he can't even lift up his head, drowning his face in his own cereal, all while a leprechaun dances on his head. This curse extends to his bar chums too, with a helicopter crashing into the ceiling of Moe's bar, crushing Lenny and Carl. While this is all happening, Moe is also drowned in a pickle jar. In the final segment, WizKids, a Harry Potter parody, Bart and Lisa are wizards taking on the Dark Lord Monty-Mort. This was released before the first Harry Potter film by only a few days, so I guess you could say that this is the first Harry Potter adaptation.
Harry Potter, are you chewing gum?
No, ma'am. It's brimstone.
The Dark Lord Monty-Mort wants to steal Lisa's magical essence, as he's not getting much from Ralph Wiggum.
Dying tickles.
After he captures her and begins to suck out all of her magic, Bart manages to beat the evil wizard by stabbing him in his enchanted shin. His lifeless body is then swallowed by snake slithers. This ends Treehouse of Horror 12 with 12 kills. Treehouse of Horror 13. This was the first Treehouse of Horror to be called, well, Treehouse of Horror. All the previous specials were titled The Simpsons Halloween Special. In the first segment, Send in the Clones, a spoof of the 1996's Multiplicity, Homer makes numerous copies of himself using a magical hammock. And for all you production art fans, this was the first episode to use digital ink as a proof of concept, which led to the decision to have the Simpsons animation converted from traditional cel to digital ink and paint. And Send in the Clones was particularly useful for this, as the technique was able to cope with the cloning sequences, which required many different layers of animation for each clone. However, these naughty little clones caused a bit of trouble in the animated universe, as soon enough the clones started to become a nuisance, like decapitating stupid sexy Flanders. So Homer decides to dump the clones in a field, shooting 3 there and then.
Does anyone remember the way home? I do.
In his absence, the clones duplicate themselves further, briefly spying Peter Griffin amongst the crowd, implying that Family Guy is just a clone of The Simpsons. And their paths would cross again in the controversial Simpsons Guy.
I think you and I are gonna get along just okay.
The clone army then devour the town's entire supply of corn, duff, and even poor old Gil. In order to get rid of the clones, they are led to a cliff edge with a giant donut, falling to their deaths. From my calculations, judging from their size and density, that's 30 plus 80, carry the 3 times the 12, and I'm sure you have, no idea. So I'm just gonna guess that there's at least 100 Homers here, plus the one clone who was electrocuted earlier. In the fright to creep and scare harms, future Homer goes back in time to warn Springfield about gun violence, only to be shot by Moe. The final segment is the island of Dr. Hibbert. Writer Kevin Curran watched all movie versions of the island of Dr. Moreau before taking on this segment, including the god-awful 1996 version, which has been dubbed one of the worst movies of all time. In this segment, the town are transformed into animals by the kinky Dr. Hibbert, including Marge, who is transformed into a blue cat, a scene that most likely spawned 1,000 furries. Professor Frank is also served up later on as a turkey for dinner.
Gobble, 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 death.
Bringing the Treehouse of Horror 13 to 108 kills. Treehouse of Horror 14. Now this episode's introduction is pure chaos. Abe's on fire, Homer's beating the kids with a baseball bat, and Marge is painting the walls with Homer's blood. So that's 4 kills in under a minute. In Reaper Madness, Homer takes over as the Grim Reaper after bludgeoning him with a bowling ball. This segment is of course a reference to the Santa Claus films starring Tim Allen, who kills Santa and in turn becomes the jolly old Kris Kringle. A sinister plot for any Christmas movie, but it was a different time. But despite the famous joke that Simpsons did it, Family Guy actually got there first. They did a similar episode in season 2 called Death is a Bitch, in which Peter becomes the Grim Reaper. As Death himself, Homer wastes no time in abusing his power, killing Jasper, a homeless man, and 17 other people at a baseball game. Also this chick who was killed by a flying baseball. The final soul he claims is Patty, who he disguises as Marge in order to trick God into not taking his wife. I absolutely love the bit where Homer's escaping God's pursuit on a motorcycle, only for God to give up because he got stuck behind a train.
Doggone it, I am too old and too rich for this.
In Frankenstein, Professor Frank reanimates his father's corpse. But Frank Sr. is unimpressed with his new robot parts and lack of genitals in a traditional sense. So he goes on a murderous rampage, first by ripping out Ned's heart, then tearing out Seymour's spine so Frank Sr. can have better posture. He then kills and uses the various body parts of Sideshow Mel, Burns and Apu, among many others. Not content with his mismatched appearance, he also wants to be more intelligent too, so he obtained this by ripping out the brains of 5 scientists. But before he can collect more cerebrums, he is kicked in the groin by his son, killing him. Fun fact, did you know that Frank Sr. is voiced by the comedian Jerry Lewis?
I'm here to accept the Nobel Prize for stupid.
Voice actor Hank Azaria based Frank's voice and mannerisms on the 1963 film The Nutty Professor, in which Lewis stars in the leading role. In the segment Stop the World, I Wanna Goof Off, Bart and Milhouse are able to stop time and so goof off. In one scene, Bart is shown cleaning his family, and when polishing Homer's head, it topples right off his shoulders. But later on, when time's resumed, Homer is alive and well. When time continues, Martin is beaten to death by an angry mob who beats the geek with a number of things, a lightsaber and a prosthetic leg. This ends Treehouse 14 with 47 kills. Treehouse of Horror 15. The episode starts with a Kang and Kodos TV special entitled Keeping It Kodos, where the Simpsons are cooked and eaten. But somehow Bart survives digestion, bursting out of the alien stomach before adopted by the alien duo. In the Ned Zone, Flanders gains the ability to foresee the deaths of anyone he touches. Poor old Dr. Hibbert is the first he envisions dying, falling to his death from a window. Next up is Hans Moleman, who is ripped apart by crocodiles.
Oh, another setback.
And when Neddy touches Homer, he envisions shooting him, which ends up becoming true, but in doing so, Homer's lifeless body hits the nuclear destruct button, blowing up Springfield. Now, we don't see how many people have perished to their deaths, but in heaven we see Homer, Ned, Marge, Lisa, Bart, and Maggie. For the same reason as before, I won't count the entire town, as who knows who could have been out of town on their hollybops. So I'm just counting these guys we see here. And finally, we have 4 beheadings and a funeral, based on the London Ripper murders. Oh yeah, and 4 weddings and a funeral. The Ripper, portrayed by Wiggum, starts his murder spree by repeatedly stabbing a prostitute. He then stabs comic book guy in the back. And next up is Selma Bouvier, who is stabbed right in the chest. When Wiggum's confronted for his crimes, he flees on a hot air balloon, but his getaway pops and crashes, ultimately killing him.
Remember me for my police work and not the murder!
But you never guess what? This all ended up to be Ralph's weird dream, derived from too much opium. This may also explain why Ralph has regular chats with leprechauns who tell him to burn things.
Burn the house down! Burn them all!
This concludes Treehouse 15 with 17 kills. Treehouse of Horror 16. This episode starts off with a bang, quite literally, because after Kodos eats a living growth on her neck, she destroys the Earth, decimating everyone on the planet, bringing the total death count up to 7.8 billion. Only joking, I'm not really counting the entire population, so let's bring that back down. In BI Bartificial Intelligence, Bart lapses into a coma after falling from a window, and so Homer and Marge replace him with a robot boy.
Replace is such an ugly word. We upgraded.
Bart wakes up and is so shocked of his replacement, so he slices David the robot in half in raging jealousy. Although Homer also gets sliced in half here, he doesn't die and is given David's cute little robot legs.
Oh.
Next up, in a parody of The Most Dangerous Game and Survival of the Fittest, Mr. Burns starts hunting down Springfieldians for sport. The first person to die is Comic Book Guy.
5 minutes of running? Shoot me now.
Next up is the blue-haired lawyer, after drawing up a legal contract allowing Mr. Burns to hunt. But thankfully, there are many more lawyers in Springfield. Can you imagine a world without lawyers?
Oh.
But back to the kills, Apu is shot while hiding in a bush. But luckily, he gets reincarnated as a bunny, only to get caught in a trap. But seeing as we don't technically see him die here, we won't count him again. Krusty the Clown is shot repeatedly. Dr. Hibbert, Dr. Nick, Lou, Kirk Van Houten, the Yes guy, and Ken Brockman are gunned down by Mr. Burns in the air. And poor old Mo gets impaled on a weather vane, while Skewered he decides to pass the time by scratching his scratch card and finds he has won the jackpot. But before he can free himself, Wiggum lands on top of him. Ugh. After only 6 hours of being hunted, Homer has already converted to cannibalism by eating Professor Frink. Burns then decides to gun down Carl, Sideshow Mel, Groundskeeper Willie, Mr. Largo, and Lenny in his plane. And there was me thinking he loved Carl.
What are you doing, man? That's Carl!
Barney Gumble is then shot next. And when Smithers opens the head sack, we can see the beheaded head of Otto and the captain. But Marge saves her homie by beating Burns and Smithers over the head. But they're only knocked out and not necessarily killed. Next up is I've Grown a Costume on Your Face. A witch casts a spell at a Halloween costume party, turning everyone into what their costume is. Because Disco Stew had an arrow prop on his head, the spell causes it to go straight through his skull. And a pack of wild dogs munch on Mayor Quimby, whose head is now a cheeseburger. However, they somehow survive this, as at the end of the episode, when Maggie turns everyone into pacifiers, we see Mayor Quimby and Disco Stew still very much alive. A character we don't see at the end, however, is Martin Prince, who was killed with bug spray when he turned into a fairy. This ends Treehouse 16 with 24 kills. Treehouse of Horror 17. As if his life wasn't hard enough, Moe gets crushed in an Iron Maiden by Zombie Smithers. In Married to the Blob, Homer eats an extraterrestrial goo and morphs into a rampaging blob with an appetite that just won't quit. So much so, he almost eats Bart whole until Marge tells him off.
Nag, nag, nag.
But he did get some protein by eating poor Snowball. Similarly to how he treated the Flying Dutchman, he sees Springfield as an all-you-can-eat buffet, gobbling up anyone he sees, including Jeremy.
Tell my friends I died kissing a girl!
No.
Also, fun fact, it's been said that The Simpsons predicted avid eaters suing all-you-can-eat restaurants for not satisfying their hunger.
But the sign said all you can eat.
Some of these guys were Olympians with Olympic appetites, and some, they weren't Olympians. You can learn more about Simpsons predictions in my book, The Simpsons Secret, a cromulent guide to how The Simpsons predicted everything. Available now, everywhere, all over the world. But back to the video, 4 German people at Oktoberfest are eaten by Hungry Hungry Homer, including Uta. There's also Fat Tony, Comic Book Guy, 4 umpires, 4 women from the Facts of Life reunion tour, 3 men dressed in Hawaiian shirts, and swallows 3 people on a bus, including Flanders.
Howdy-ho, Blobberino.
Dr. Phil even tries to reason with him, pleading him to stop his gluttonous ways, but he's also eaten by Homer. To stop him from eating the entire town, Quimby decides to kill 2 birds with 1 stone by feeding Springfield's homeless to Homer. In You Gotta Know When to Gollum, Bart finds the Golem of Prague, a creature from Jewish mythology. In a flashback to its creation, the clay sculpture comes to life and guns down 8 people. The Golem, now working for Krusty, is then responsible for shooting anyone who is unimpressed with the clown's crappy jokes. When Bart Simpson becomes the new master of Gollum, he instructs the giant to tear and swap around the heads of his bullies. But according to the newspapers, the next day, Jimbo, Kearney and Dolph miraculously survived and were only hospitalized. Bart's careless need for killing then turns to Seymour Skinner, as the Golem uses him like a yo-yo until his body splits in half.
Skinner? I wish we'd been closer.
In this segment, The Day the Earth Looks Stupid, early 1930s Springfield are fooled by an Orson Welles War of the Worlds style radio broadcast.
So, it's a War of the Worlds.
Which was actually something that happened in real life. Now it may sound silly, but just imagine that the radio was their only means of communication, and therefore no one to state otherwise. Yeah, they're newspapers, but the radio was so quick and instant, so hearing that news must have been pretty shocking. But back to The Simpsons. Riots ensued, and the town soon turned on one another, a scene we have seen many times before. These guys are a little bit fickle. Moe beats Barney with a baseball bat, and Homer guns down Lenny and Stu, before cutting the head of the captain.
It's either kill him or kill no one.
But unlike the real events, the world really is under attack.
You must believe me. This is no hoax. This is a real invasion.
With Kang and Kodos rocking up to join in with the mayhem. Their spaceship plugs Wiggum up and sucks his insides all the way out. They then go on to destroy most of Springfield, but we don't see any bodies. This ends Treehouse 17 with 46 kills. Treehouse of Horror 18. In this episode, Marge's monologue is brought back like the early seasons, but this time she is interrupted by a pop-up of advertisements for Fox shows. So she goes all Mary Kondo and sprays 4 miniature football players right to death, turns a cop into mush, and cooks House in a microwave where he expands and explodes. In the first segment of this episode, E.T. Go Home, Bart discovers Kodos hiding in the backyard. The alien asks for help so he can contact home. But this alien isn't as innocent as the E.T. we know.
Then I was accidentally left behind, in a spirit of peace.
This one's planning on bringing his own kind over to Earth to take over it. While running away from the government military, Kodos vaporizes 3 soldiers with his ray gun.
You killed them!
Well done, Columbo!
Kodos succeeds in bringing hordes of his own kind down to Earth. But the government's army are on defense, taking on the green-domed aliens with missiles.
What did I miss?
Oh yeah, and then Homer suffocates Kodos with a pillow too. In Mr. and Mrs. Simpson, Homer and Marge are killers for hire. Homer is hired to take down Ken Brockman, but is beaten to the punch by Marge. Homer tries to shoot down the mysterious woman, but accidentally takes down 4 men in the process. He then shoots down the captain and Disco Stew, and snipes a waiter whose blood fills up a pyramid of wine glasses. Back at home, Homer and Marge find out about their secret lives and get into a bit of a kerfuffle, and poor old Grandpa gets caught in the crossfire. When Wiggum investigates the disturbance, he is shot in the chest by Marge with an arrow.
I would have taken a bribe.
But they soon make up for their fight with a bit of sweet loving. And while doing the nasty, we cut to the couple in Skinner's office. And so the episode ends with the 2 of them shooting the principal. I wonder who paid them to do that. In Heck House, Ned asks for God's help to scare some sense into the local hoodlums. This is after their tricks get wildly out of hand, such as causing a truck driver to plow into a building and explode. Pretty intense. As we only see the truck driver here, I'm only counting 1 death. As punishment, the kids are sucked down into hell and are shown the 7 deadly sins. For gluttony, Homer is peeled inside out and turned into spaghetti, but he doesn't die right here, instead asking for more bread.
More bread, please.
For anger, they show groundskeeper Willie kicking his truck before transforming into a living monstrous machine, slicing off his own head. Dr. Hibbert is then crushed by a car for having pride in his children's accomplishments. And Homer is brought back to be punished and sliced into tiny little cubes by his hammock for a sin of sloth. But it's not all bad. The twisted lesson does teach the kids to behave.
All we'll do from now on is pray and fight in wars.
Ending Treehouse of Horror 18 with 105 kills. Treehouse of Horror 19. The episode opens with Homer being murdered by a voting machine after it refuses to let him vote for Obama. The machine was rigged, making him vote for the Republican John McCain.
6 votes for President McCain.
Hey, I only meant 1 of those votes for McCain.
In an interview about this particular scene, Al Jean didn't take any side. He stated that this part was mostly a comment on what many people believe to be the irregularities in our voting system. The first proper segment is Untitled Robot Parody, i.e. a Transformers parody.
Look, you have made the nacho machine cry.
But the odd thing about this parody is it takes place over Christmas rather than, well, you know, Halloween. When a plane is fighting with a stair car, the plane is kicked in the groin, vomiting a pile full of dead passengers. And from my past experience with planes, I'd say that this is an Airbus A320, which usually seats around 140 to 170 passengers. But I'll be optimistic and say it was only 140. While all of this madness is going on, Grandpa has a heart attack after inhaling too much oxygen. But the robots finally decide to squash their beef, teaming up to conquer mankind, and so tie up the Springfieldians for a giant game of foosball. Next up, in a parody of period drama series Mad Men entitled How to Get Ahead in Deadvertising, Homer is paid to take out celebrities so advertisers can use their likeness for commercials for free.
Who's good at killing celebrities?
Me!
That's right.
And Krusty is the first to get clobbered when Homer pushes him into a wood chipper in an honestly really gnarly death scene. Homer then drowns George Clooney in quicksand, stabs Prince with a guitar, and bludgeons Neil Armstrong with a golf club. Later on at a party, Homer also states that killing Kate Winslet paid for his chocolate fountain. Meanwhile, up in heaven, the dead celebs and historical figures are outraged by these exploits, descending from above to start blasting people at the party. Edward G. Robinson shoots Wiggum for ripping him off.
You're gonna pay for what you done, see?
And Krusty finally gets his revenge by busting open Homer's head with a shotgun. As Homer gets to heaven first, he locks the pearly gates so no one else can get in, before making chums with President Lincoln. Now I don't know how the hell Homer got into heaven after all those deaths, but I'll leave that up to God. Lastly, we have the Grand Pumpkin Millhouse. A pretty obvious title, but one that had to be negotiated carefully due to legal rights from the original Peanuts series. However, one thing that wasn't negotiated was its darkness. Like the original Snoopy short, Millhouse is waiting in the pumpkin patch for the Grand Pumpkin on Halloween.
The Grand Pumpkin.
And of course, no one believes him, and so he starts to cry. But lo and behold, his tears cause the Grand Pumpkin to rise. And a seemingly wholesome moment soon turns into a rotten one after he observes his own kind being butchered and eaten. I think now's a good time to put away your pumpkin spice lattes. Lighting a fire without a tea light under his ass, he commenced a killing spree. Witnessing Homer carve into his brethren, he eats Homer whole. The Great One then barges into the school, all Kool-Aid Man style.
Oh yeah!
And our guy gets even madder, swallowing Willie whole. No naughty jokes please, enough of that, get out. And then he eats Nelson. Next we see him scooping out Skinner's brains to make a Seymour O-Lantern. Lisa Simpson, always being one to save the day in the canon and the non-canon, makes Millhouse believe in Tom Turkey, who then crashes the party, and so uses his cornucopia to blast a hole into the Great Pumpkin. The head splits open to reveal Homer, Willie and Nelson still very much alive, so let's deduct 3 from their kill count. But Tom Turkey soon learns that his kind are being slaughtered and eaten too, so he vows revenge and plucks 2 children to eat. Watching the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown is honestly one of my favourite Halloween traditions, so it's so nice seeing it translated into The Simpsons. I especially love spotting the various similarities, such as the redesigned version of Santa's little helper sleeping on top of his doghouse. But no matter how cute it is, Treehouse of Horror 19 has 158 kills. Treehouse of Horror 20. Now, one thing I love about the newest seasons of the Treehouse of Horror specials are the amazing posters. I genuinely don't think they get enough recognition. But now back to the show. The episode starts with the Simpsons family hosting a Halloween party. The iconic monsters come to join the fun, but oh golly gosh, their wives show up and are appalled to find their spouses cheating. Homer tries to defuse the situation by claiming,
"It's not cheating when you're wearing a costume." Not the face!
But come on Homer, I know you've got a crayon lodged in your brain, but I'm pretty sure you weren't dressed as a freaking ghost when you were leering at Moore Flanders' chest. Anyway, quite rightly, the monster wives then proceed to attack Homer, tearing off his head where it lands into the punch bowl. We then journey into the next segment, dial M for murder or press the hash key to return to the main menu. In this one, Lisa is forced into a Hitchcockian murder scene by Bart, telling her he will get revenge on Miss Hoover if she gets revenge on Edna for putting him in detention. But Lisa only ding-dong ditches Edna while Bart decapitates Miss Hoover, a teacher which I'm sure you'd agree doesn't deserve so much malice. With a taste for blood, he now proceeds to behead Skinner. Lisa realizes that the only way to end the bloodshed is by killing her brother, so she chases him across the school with a knife in her hands. While running away, Bart bumps into Alfred Hitchcock and tumbles off of Mount Rushmore. She finally catches up with him, but realizes she's not really into murder as much as him anyway. So she tosses the knife away, but as it falls, it plants itself right into Bart's head. Edna applauds Lisa and spins Bart's dead body away with the playground roundabout. In Don't Have a Cow Mankind, a parody of 28 Days Later and Children of Men, Krusty's new Burger Squid is released. But not only does it go straight to your waist, it also turns you into a zombie. A moment on your lips, a lifetime. Well, just your lifetime really. Ken Brockman is the first to try the new burger, instantly transforming into a zombie. He then takes a big chunk out of Krusty's arm, zombifying him almost instantly. Ken then bites into squeaky voiced teen, and zombie Krusty eats the cameraman. The scene cuts forward to 28 days later to reveal that the whole town had been overtaken by the zombie plague. Now, unlike the last zombie episode where we couldn't tell who was freshly bitten or who had risen from their graves, everyone in this segment are freshly turned zombies, and that includes pretty much the entire town. So I've done the painstaking task of counting every zombie and dead person on screen. The things I do for you people. You better be subscribed. Throughout the episode, I counted at least 188 dead people, including Homer.
Where do you want it, the mouth or the eyes?
Ooh, mouth.
The most gruesome death is left to Springfield's own stuntman, Hans Moleman. The Simpsons make it to the safe zone, and as Bart can't be turned into a zombie, his body holds the cure. So he bathes in everyone's food so people can get vaccinated against the disease. It's unclear here if the zombies are cured and return to normal, or if Bart only vaccinated the remaining people, as Homer Simpson is still a zombie. Either way, the count still stands. Finally, there's no business like Mo Business. In this rather creative segment, the whole thing is set out like a live play.
This is the best musical in light years.
But unfortunately, there's no kills here. But it just goes to show how the writers can do some really creative things in the Treehouse specials that they don't really get to do otherwise. And sometimes it's a nice breather to not see so much gore, exploring the story a bit more than the violence. But enough of that soppy stuff. Treehouse of Horror 20 has a combined body count of 197 kills. Treehouse of Horror 21. The episode starts off in typical fashion with Homer strangling Bart before he sticks a flaming hot pumpkin on his dad's head. We then zoom out to reveal Frank watching the action on TV. He then fast forwards to show Homer attempting to drown his son, until Bart rams a witch's hat into Homer's eye. There's a whole lot of violence, but no actual kills. Except Frank, that is, who uses a rapid age accelerator to turn himself into dust.
Getting all of the gray in the The
first segment is called War and Pieces, and it's a Jumanji spoof. Bart and Milhouse discover an old board game called Satan's Path, a game that turns the entire town into a giant board game. But there's nothing dangerous about board games, right? Well, let's just say you'll never look at Kaplunk the same way again. The first casualty is Chief Wiggum, who is crushed underneath the knights. Next up is poor Mole Man, who is stabbed off screen. Seriously, will his torment ever end?
This could be useful.
And to escape from the madness, Bart and Milhouse jump onto a ship, which soon sinks in typical battleship fashion. They swim to a Scrabble piece nearby, but Milhouse is completely done, so he lets go of it and then falls to the bottom of the sea. A ravenous horde of cards then run after Bart. He pulls a stick out of Kaplunk, which sets the cubes free, crushing poor, but creepy, Rod and Todd. He then uses the sticks to stab 12 living cards. After Bart manages to complete the game, he and a revived Milhouse are sent back to the real world, but the games aren't over yet, as both of the boys are hung after losing Hangman. Master and Cadaver. In a Dead Calm spoof, Homer and Marge rescue a man at sea while on their second honeymoon. The stranger tells them a story, and then we cut to a flashback to find that his entire crew were poisoned. Homer and Marge soon become suspicious of the stranger, convinced that he was the one who killed the crew. But as it turns out, he was actually telling the truth the entire time. But that doesn't stop bloodthirsty Homer impaling the poor guy with a harpoon gun. And at the same time, we soon discover that the crew has survived the poisoning after all. However, horrible Homer strikes again and proceeds to beat one man to death with a flare gun before it fires into another person. And then he pierces two other men with an anchor. Feeling guilty, Marge then proceeds to kill herself with a poisoned pie. And so it ends as a reveal that it was all part of Maggie's imagination, and with a sinister expression, she dons a hat and drinks milk like Alex from A Clockwork Orange. And this won't be the last time we see the little psycho dress up as Alex either. The final segment of Treehouse 21 is Tweenlight, a parody of everyone's favourite monumental film, Twilight. Lisa Simpson falls for the new kid on the block, Edmund.
You have beautiful eyes.
They're just dots and circles.
However, Edmund turns out to be a vampire. While Lisa and Edmund are in the woods, we see Homer as Yogi Bear holding a picnic basket containing a park ranger's head. This is a callback to the season 10 episode When You Dish Upon a Star, when Homer has a dream that he's Yogi Bear and mauls poor Flanders. He and his family are then invited to the Simpsons house for dinner, and they impress the vampiric family by serving up stupid, sexy Flanders. I bet you could get a good steak out of him. Also, fun fact, Edmund isn't actually voiced by Robert Pattinson here, but rather his Harry Potter co-star, Daniel Radcliffe.
You're tearing me apart!
Radcliffe said he's been a huge fan of the show and guest starring was a huge honour. There was a time when I was 12 or 13 when 50% of everything I knew about the world came from The Simpsons, so this was a big deal. While Homer is out driving with Dracula, they see Count Von Count eating Big Bird. Ordinarily, I wouldn't have counted a vampire by, but he looks pretty darn dead here to me. Towards the end of the episode, Dracula and Edmund suck Homer's blood, but end up dying due to diabetes. Probably because 95% of Homer's blood is donut fat and sugar.
Donut.
Homer then turns into a vampire and transforms into a bat, but being too fat to fly, he falls to his death, where he is eaten by Dog Milhouse. And so that ends Treehouse 21 with 32 kills. Treehouse of Horror 22. The episode starts off with a parody of the 2010 film 127 Hours, which was based on a real-life story of Aaron Ralston, whose arm became trapped under a rock in Utah, and he was forced to cut himself free. And amazingly, Ralston voiced the 911 dispatcher Homer calls when he's trapped.
I need a helicopter rescue and some cold milk.
Copy that, sir. We'll be there in 20 minutes.
Although there are no deaths in the opening, Homer does manage to cut off both of his arms and legs, all in order to reach a bag of candy. However, instead of finding sweet treats, he instead finds some disgusting veggies, which I'm sure you'd all agree is a fate worse than death. In the first segment, Dial D for Diddley, Flanders finally gets some payback after all of his beheadings in the previous specials. In this segment, Flanders becomes a serial killer for God, which is pretty badass. He starts by viciously dismembering a person who I think is Mayor Quimby, and so dumps his body parts into the sea. Ned then spies Burns dumping toxic waste into the water, so he cuts his head off and tosses it into the water. Afterwards, he kills Snake by casting the first stone. Later on, we also see a newspaper article stating that he's killed Sideshow Bob. Ned then lures Patty and Selma into a Looney Tunes inspired trap and crushes them both with a big old rock. But poor Ned Flanders finds out that Homer has been tricking him all along by impersonating God, and God himself isn't too happy with this either, and so strangles Homer to death.
Flanders killed Homer.
Next up is In the Na'vi, a parody of the film Avatar. Bart infiltrates the home planet of Kang and Kodos, posing as an alien, and much like the movie, a war plays out between the aliens and the humans. During this battle, I counted 8 aliens and 50 human deaths. The final scene sees Super Nintendo Chalmers falling to his death from a cliff. And to all the people who call me an idiot for apparently mispronouncing his name, it's a Bloody Ralph reference.
Hi, Super Nintendo Chalmers!
Treehouse of Horror 22 ends with 66 kills. Treehouse of Horror 23. The episode starts in Mayan times, and Mo is being sacrificed to the gods. His head is chopped off and it bounces down the steps, where it's then kicked around like a football. Cut to present day, Homer answers the door and finds the giant Mayan gods there. He is then stomped on and his intestines spill out. These stone gods then proceed to destroy Springfield before blowing up the earth. But like I mentioned before, I'm not counting these, as the numbers inflate so much, it really takes the fun out of it. This opening was a reference to the 2012 End of Days prediction. Some people actually thought that the end of the world was coming because supposedly ancient Mayans predicted it. And if you believe that, then I have a bridge to sell you. We then go straight into the first segment, the greatest story ever told. A big black hole is created in Springfield that begins to suck everything up. This was a reference to the Large Hadron Collider, which many people thought at the time it would create a black hole that would destroy the Earth. The residents of Springfield are then sucked into the hole, but instead of dying, they are transported into another world. But weirdly, the only person to die is Sideshow Mel, whose skeleton is ripped out of his skin. In Unnormal Activity, a parody of Paranormal Activity, the Simpsons are plagued by a demonic presence. So Chief Wiggum comes round to try and help, but is reduced to a pile of bones by the devil. Homer manages to get rid of the demon by having a 3-way with him and another devil.
Before we start, what's the safe word?
Cinnamon.
Ooh, I like that.
This ends Treehouse 23 with only 4 kills. Treehouse of Horror 24. This is one of my favorite couch gags of all time. Directed by Oscar winner Guillermo del Toro, it is chock full of excellent movie references. For me, as a Simpsons fanatic, that was a dream come true, says the Pan's Labyrinth director. I'm only counting the zombies we recognize as deaths, as we may be able to assume that the other zombies were already zombies before this whole shebang. And let's face it, who the hell is that guy? Therefore, I am only going to include Jimbo, Kearney, Comic Book Guy, Agnes, and Brandine into the kill count. And much like the regular intro, Jimbo and Kearney cut off the head of Jebediah Springfield, but this time it lands on Ralph and chops his head right off. And as I counted Lard Lad as a death last time, it's only fair that I include him again when he is eaten by Cyclops Wiggum. Next we see Carl dressed as Blade chopping off Lenny's head. We then pan down to reveal the original Tracy Ullman Simpsons family buried underneath the power plant. I did a whole video exploring our conspiracy surrounding this, which you can check out in the iCard now. However, they most likely died years before this episode, seeing as an entire power plant was built above their grave. Fairy Smithers is then eaten by Pale Man Mr. Burns, which is a reference to Del Toro's incredible movie, Pan's Labyrinth. Milhouse is then run off the road and into the jaws of Blinky. Then Homer is run over. And 3 fairies are zapped into ashes. And that was just the opening. In a Dr. Seuss parody, Oh the Places You Do, the Fat in the Hat comes by and causes a whole lot of trouble. And this cat is a whole lot naughtier than the one in the Cat in the Hat. Much like the Grand Pumpkin Charlie Brown, the creators emulated the classic Dr. Seuss art style. I always love when the Treehouse of Horror specials do this, and I love seeing Springfield reimagined in different art styles. Underneath his hat, he shows 10 dead little people.
Knew there was something I left off my list. Without food, air, and water, they cease to exist.
It looks like these guys have been dead for a while, and I'm not counting any deaths that happened off screen before the episode even started, so for this reason, I'm not counting these as kills. The Fat in the Hat then blasts Mr. Burns' mansion with fireworks, cooking Smithers alive. And when Mr. Burns doesn't die, his neck is then snapped. He then proceeds to snap Moe's neck and uses his corpse as a cozy thneed. Afterwards, he then butchers Patty and Selma. He then goes on to slaughter a mountain of people, and there is absolutely no freaking way for me to accurately count this pile of bodies, but I'm gonna do my very, very best. Taking into account that this pile of little people may be a 3-dimensional thing within a 2-dimensional world, I'm gonna have to use some pretty pretentious math to sort this one out. As this pile is in a triangular shape, I'm going to use the formula area equals HBB divided by 2. The HB would be how many people are in line from the top to the bottom of the point, which I calculate to be around 48. I'm then able to multiply this by the base of the triangle, which I'm calculating as 20 people. So 48 times 20 is 960, and then I'm going to divide it by 2 because it's a triangle, so I'm going to make that around 480.
Don't forget me!
Cow Krusty is then decapitated by Sideshow Bob. But the Fat in the Hat's reign of terror comes to an end when Maggie stabs him with his own umbrella. Good old Maggie, always there coincidentally when someone needs to be put back in their place.
What a great little accident you turned out to be.
Next up is Dead and Shoulders. While out flying kites, Bart falls asleep and coils the string around his neck. And when Arnie Pie in the sky flies over, the kite string gets caught and slices off his head. Although his head is stitched onto Lisa's body, he does technically die because there's no beating heart. But Lisa also gets decapitated by a buzzsaw. Bart would later get stitched onto Selma's body, poor old kid, but at least he doesn't have to massage his aunt's feet ever again.
It's time to rub Aunt Patty's feet.
And finally, we have Freaks, No Geeks, a parody of the 1932 film Freaks. Mr. Bernstrom opens up a travelling freak show and unveils Kang and Kodos, but I'd say his scariest attraction is Mo.
How you doing?
Jimbo, Kearney and Dolph sneak under the tent only to get eaten by a lion. The freaks get fed up of their cruel treatment and hang up Mr. Bernstrom. The episode randomly ends with a How I Met Your Mother parody in present day.
And that, kids, is How I Met Your Mother.
But even weirder, it then cuts to an old newspaper headline stating that Homer, Babe Ruth and Stalin have died of unknown causes. And to be honest, this makes absolutely no sense, so I'm just going to personally ignore this bit, but if it does bother you, then feel free to add it to your own kill count. This ends Treehouse of Horror 24 with 508 kills. Treehouse of Horror 25. This episode starts with a showcase of the previous Treehouse deaths, most of which we've seen before, but some of these are brand new, such as Homer eating his own intestines. We don't see him die, but it's a pretty obvious assumption that he cannot survive this. Next, we see Lisa squeeze Bart's decapitated head in a vase. And the curtains peel back to reveal the severed body parts of celebrities to spell out the monumental words, Treehouse of Horror. John Travolta is somehow alive, but his head is soon exploded by Kang and Kodos. The first segment is School is Hell, where Bart and Lisa are transported into a demon-filled alternate universe. As Bart and Lisa walk through the school, you can spot a demon being force-fed unlimited donuts. This is a reference to the Treehouse 4, where the same thing happened to Homer. But it wasn't exactly a punishment for Homer.
More.
In this hellish world, Bart is excelling in school, getting an A in long division by chopping up Hans Moleman in half with an axe. Bart then chops off Jimbo's head for show and tell. He then also tenderizes Homer with a mace, but he miraculously survives this beating. Also during this segment, we see a demon stuffed in an Iron Maiden locker. In A Clockwork Yellow, a parody of a number of Stanley Kubrick films, Homer beats Sideshow Mel with his own bone. This is a callback to 2001: A Space Odyssey, something they'd already parodied years ago with Homer. Finally, we have the others. The Simpsons are plagued by strange incidents, like finding frosty chocolate milkshakes lying around the house. And after a seance, the spirits finally reveal themselves, and they're shocked to find that they are the Tracy Ullman counterparts.
Don't have a cow, man. Shut up! Ay, caramba!
This is a callback to the season 24 episode Adventures in Baby Getting, where we briefly saw the old Simpsons buried underneath their house. Algie mentioned in an interview, "We've implied that they were murdered and buried underneath the house," so this is expanding that thought. When the two families meet, Homer and Ghost Marge immediately start flirting.
By the way, nice melons.
Those are in the kitchen.
And this really upsets Marge, so she goes and offs herself to turn herself into a ghost too. The Tracy Ullman Homer then gets jealous and proceeds to beat his doppelganger with a toaster. Lisa falls out of a window to her death after being tricked by Bart. Bart Ghost Lisa soon gets revenge on her sibling by slingshotting an acorn into Bart's mouth, choking him. And Maggie Simpson is suspiciously killed by groundskeeper Willie. Now both the Simpsons are ghosts. The spirit of Dr. Marvin Monroe appears to help them make amends.
Are you alive or dead?
I'm in some horrible limbo.
Monroe was killed off screen many years ago because voicing the character strained Harry Shearer's voice. Both ghost versions of Maggie then abduct the one-eyebrowed baby and kill him with a mallet, rounding this special with 26 kills. Treehouse of Horror 26. In an artistically groovy couch gag, we see Nelson, Milhouse, Ralph, and Jessica Lovejoy hanging from a tree. Their spirits are then blown out of their bodies as they chase after Bart, Lisa, and Maggie. They run into Frank Grimes, who is risen from the dead. He grabs onto Bart and peels him like a banana and sucks out his gooey insides. But as Bart is literally in the next shot running away, we won't count this as a death. However, Grimy does get to rip out Homer's soul and eat it. Delicious payback after all those miserable years.
Hi, grimy old buddy.
I'm not your buddy, Simpson. I don't like you. In fact, I hate you.
Wanted Dead Then Alive is the moment where Sideshow Bob finally gets to kill Bart again and again. Because killing the prankster once just wasn't enough. I mean, he did have to go through all those bloody rakes just to get to him. Kelsey Grammer, the voice of Bob, was excited that his character would finally get to kill Bart, exclaiming, "Oh, finally!" Producer Al Jean said, "I was always the kid that wanted Coyote to eat Roadrunner, so this made me very happy." After shooting Bart with a spear gun, he tears out his intestines for a warm, nice scarf. Bob takes a picture of his kill for Fiendbook. And on his feed, we see a status update from Fat Tony that reads, "You won't be seeing much of Louie no more," which seems to imply that Louie is now sleeping with the fishes. I was really debating about whether or not to include this kill, but it's heavily implied, so let's go and add it. However, Bob feels that his life is no longer worth living after accomplishing his lifelong conquest.
It seems the only thing that made me happy in my accursed life was killing you.
So he builds a reanimating machine so he can butcher the boy in new sadistic ways. When he brings him back to life the first time, he kills him with a sledgehammer twice. He goes on to bring him back several times to enact some really brutal kills, so here they are. Shoots him point blank in the face, mauled by a lion, flattened with a steamroller, dies of a heart attack after seeing the electricity bill of the machine, makes him into fruit punch, and finally cuts him into pieces. His family finally save Bart from a lifetime of unending kills by knocking out Bob. Homer then hacks off his head with a lamp. In Homerzilla, Homer is a giant monster that can only be appeased with donuts. And while seasoning a donut, Grandpa chokes to death on some stray sprinkles. Now a ghost, he meets the spirit of Marge's father, but not wanting to spend the rest of eternity with Grandpa, he stabs himself, becoming a ghost of a ghost. But is it a death if he's already dead? Well, seeing as I counted Homer's death as a ghost, I'll add this to the kill count as well. Without his donut offering, Homerzilla turns up and goes on a rampage. He starts by roasting Moe into a pile of ashes. He then stamps on Frank. After working up a sweat destroying the city, Homerzilla dabs his face with Chalmers before throwing him into a burning building. The final segment is Telepaths of Glory, a parody of the 2012 film Chronicle. Milhouse gains special powers and instantly starts to abuse them, like throwing his bully Dolph into a volcano.
This is not a proportional punishment!
But before he can kill anyone else, he is zapped by Maggie, who gained powers after sucking on a radioactive rod. I do wonder if this is the same inanimate carbon rod that won the Worker of the Week award and featured on Times magazine. That is one good looking rod. This ends Treehouse 26 with 23 kills. Treehouse of Horror 27. The episode starts off with the Simpsons shopping for a Christmas tree when Sideshow Bob, Can, Grimy, and the Leprechaun jump out. But before they can attack the family, Maggie, like the little psychopath she is, springs into action and slices off their heads. Now, I'm only counting 3 people here, as Frank Grimes was already a ghost and thus unfazed by the beheading. He also didn't rise back to heaven afterwards like the previous 2 ghosts. Instead, his punishment is to watch all 600 episodes of The Simpsons, a fate worse than death, for him anyway. But for me, it's absolute heaven. Just give me a donut and a beer and a big old TV and I'm sorted. We then go into our first segment, Dry Hard. Mr. Burns introduces a contest in which Springfield's children have to fight to their death, and like the Hunger Games it parodies, there are a lot of kills. So let's get started. As the games are set to begin, Ralph steps off his podium a bit too eagerly and explodes.
What did I miss? Oh.
During the battle, Homer parachutes into the arena and lands on Petter and Peter. Gerald Sampson is killed when his own gun recoils, leaving behind a lonely eyebrow. Wendell's impaled on Nelson's sword. Barney cuts off Ned's head and impales it on his car. And Nelson is shot in the back with an arrow by Milhouse.
Right in the back, like the coward I am.
We next see Mr. Burns' face floating face down in the snow, most likely beaten to death by an angry mob. Next up is BFF RIP. Lisa's imaginary best friend Rachel is jealous of Lisa's real best friends and starts getting rid of them so they can spend more time together.
Hello, best friend.
So she starts by running down Janie with a lawnmower and topples a tombstone on Sherry and Terry. Rachel then goes on to kill Lisa's counselor with a painting and suffocates Milhouse with a plastic bag. We also see a quick glimpse into Lisa's mind, where we see her run over Buddha with a car. Lisa gets the blame for all of these murders and so gets put into the slammer. But Bart rescues his sister from jail, and while all this is happening, Snake shivs Wiggum in the neck. Back at home, Lisa's imaginary friend then attempts to kill Marge. She throws a knife at her, but Snowball jumps in the way just in time to get stabbed instead. Now that's a loyal kitty. She then goes after Homer and strangles him, but he calls his imaginary best friend Sergeant Sausage for help, but she drags him into the kitchen and cooks him in the microwave where he explodes. To put an end to the slaughter, Lisa turns Rachel into her mother, so she slowly fades out of existence. But when Homer is eating Sergeant Sausage, his imaginary friend returns and says,
"Actually, as an imaginary friend, I can never die."
So let's deduct those 2 imaginary friend deaths from the kill count. In Mofinger, Bart is running away from his bullies and is cornered by Dolph, Jimbo and Kearney. But before they can get their mitts on him, Mo comes to the rescue by taking out all 3 of them. But we do hear them groaning, so I think they're only knocked out and not actually killed. Oh. Mo then tells Bart that his drunken patrons are actually covert agents and that he wants Bart to join their team in Homer's place. While Mo and Bart talk about the mission, we see Carl fencing with a robot in the background. When he stabs the machine, he gets electrocuted. Now, seeing as we don't really see him again in the episode, I think it's safe to say he died. And like the movie, a fight breaks out, with Bart taking out everyone, all Kingsman style. So many die in this scene, so let's go and give them a count. Disco Stew is stabbed in the eye by a cue stick. He twists off Sideshow Mel's head, decapitates Wolfcastle, stabs Jasper in the eye with a meat fork, cooks Skinner's face in a barbecue, and disembowels Nelson with a candy apple. While all of this is happening, people are dying left, right, and center, so it was really tricky, but I did count 56 deaths. After this immense bloodbath, the final person to be killed is Homer, who is stabbed in the back by Bart. Rounding off Treehouse 27 with 83 kills. Treehouse of Horror 28. In a sausage party style opening, we see the Simpsons and 12 other sentient candies in a bowl, and they are all gobbled up apart from the Simpsons. The family then eat a chocolate bunny that wishes to be put out of its misery.
Thank you.
It's super short, but at least it didn't get as messed up as the original sausage party. In The Exorcist, Maggie gets possessed by an evil demon named Pazuzu.
No one leaves alive.
And one of Maggie's toys, a cowboy doll, comes to life before blasting his own stuffing out with a gun. Murderous Maggie then impales Helen Lovejoy with a fire poker, before stabbing Dr. Hibbert in the neck with a thermometer. Ned restrains Maggie with Bible ribbons, but she uses her power to beat him with a toy telephone and chokes him with a toy car. In Coralisa, a parody of Coraline, another one of my Halloween favourites, Lisa discovers a doorway to an alternate universe where her family have buttons for eyes. The original film was actually an adaptation of a book written by Neil Gaiman, and we even get to hear his voice in the episode as he plays Snowball the cat.
Sometimes tiny doors lead to big opportunities.
The animation in this segment is so superb, and seeing the Simpsons family in 3D adds a whole new dimension to the show, quite literally.
For a Halloween show middle segment, this is amazing.
When the rest of the family find out about the secret passageway, they enter the other world, and Homer immediately strangles Button Bart until his head pops off. Button Homer then impales himself on some scissors, but we do see him at the end, still alive with the scissors stuck right in him. And it's implied that the other Bart didn't die either, but he was at school, so just to be safe, I won't be adding their kills or deaths to the kill count. In the final segment, Homer finds out he not only looks yummy, but also tastes delicious too. In a stomach-churning scene, he goes all Great Butchering Bake-Off, twisting a corkscrew into his ear to pull out some gooey brain matter for some batter flavour. After making a cupcake, he decorates it with a tooth. He then mutilates his own stomach skin and fingers to make some more tasty dishes. Now I've got to say that this segment is absolutely disgusting, and a lot of you guys also thought the same, commenting it on my old kill count, how this was so hard to watch, and this is exactly what the creators intended. We want to surprise people, executive producer Al Jean told EW. We heard a lot of people saying they wanted something that was scary. There definitely have been comments said about wanting the horror back in Treehouse of Horror, and I've been worried at every stage that this was going too far. And Marge Simpson was also worried. She had enough of this excruciating horror, and so took Homer to an addiction counselor.
Now excuse me, I need to go get famous talking about you.
The counselor was voiced by William Friedkin, the director of the 1973 classic, The Exorcist. But the weird thing is that we did have an Exorcist parody earlier on in the episode with Maggie, so it is a bit of a weird choice to have him in this segment rather than the other one, but perhaps it was a bit too obvious. But the counselling doesn't work, and Mario Batali is in search of new ingredients and convinces Homer to let him serve up what's left of him in several restaurants across Springfield. But it's not just Homer. Carl mentions they also served up Barney and Comic Book Guy. Rounding off Treehouse 28 with 20 kills. Treehouse of Horror 29. The episode starts off in the town of Fogberry Port, and we get the long-awaited return of the tombstones. Upon them we see engraved Slow News Days, ESPN, Toys R Us, and Watermelon Oreos. In this episode, the Simpsons are vacationing in the grim town when Cthulhu rises out of the ocean. And instead of being sacrificed, Homer challenges the creature to an eating contest, and Homer beats him easily, who in return promises anything his heart so desires, like everlasting life. But gluttonous, greedy Homer chooses to kill and cook Cthulhu. And then we go into Intrusion of the Poddy Switchers. The entire town is overrun by plant body snatchers, but instead of dying like regular zombies, they are transported into another world. However, a few people are still killed in this segment, including Wiggum, who is shot by a Lou. And although the real Wiggum is later seen in the other world, the plant version of him was still killed. Lou then goes on to run over 5 plant Springfieldians with his car. While all of this is going down in town, Willie is seen trying to decapitate Chalmers, believing he's a plant person. But seeing as we do see Chalmers later on in the other world, he must have escaped the crazed Scotsman. When Lisa is overtaken by a plant, she envisions the Green Giant eating his son. Next up is Multiplicity, a parody of the film Split, where a mixed personality Lisa locks Bart, Milhouse, and Nelson inside a cell. Dead Willie is also there with an axe in his head. It seems that groundskeeper Willie and axes do not get on.
Ugh, I'm bad at this.
However, the boys do manage to escape, but Nelson is impaled by a forklift. And Lisa throws Milhouse into a newspaper bundler, crushing him. But surprisingly, this doesn't kill the dud, as he is compacted into a bundle of newspapers and it seems absolutely fine.
Have a perfume sample.
The final segment is Geriatric Park, a parody of the Jurassic Park franchise. In it, Mr. Burns opens up a Jurassic-themed retirement home after injecting senior citizens with dino DNA. While showing a presentation of how the DNA transformation works, an old man turns into a dinosaur and bites the head of 2 people. While in a lab, a little dinosaur head jumps onto Smithers' Adam's apple, choking him to death. And when the senior citizens' dino DNA manifests, all hell breaks loose. Agnes Skinner starts to eat her son. Mole Man is stomped on by a dinosaur.
Dang it!
Kirk's head is torn off and dumped into a head bin. Professor Frink is beaten to death by his other scientist peers. And a staff member is whipped by a tail and is sent flying. Oh yeah, and Mr. Burns is swallowed whole. Rounding off Treehouse 29 with 19 kills. Treehouse of Horror 30. This episode is made even spookier by being the 666th of the entire franchise, the number of the devil, fitting as this episode starts off with a parody of The Omen. An evil Maggie strangles Dr. Hibbert with a stethoscope, throwing him in a baby incubator, where he's cremated. During Maggie's birthday party, Kearney, Shauna, and Dolph hang themselves from a window, but they don't actually die, deciding instead to make out. To rid the world of the pint-sized terror, Ned takes Maggie to a church to obliterate her. To prove she's the spawn of the devil, he shows Marge and Homer the mark of the beast, a Mickey Mouse-shaped birthmark. Yeah, that sounds about right. But before they could do any more, Maggie impales the 3 of them with stone pillars. The first segment is Danger Things, which of course is a parody of, you guessed it, Stranger Things. When Milhouse is taken to the over-under, Lisa heads to the alternate dimension to investigate. And in a cute clever joke, we observe Lisa's past Tracy Ullman's self in the process.
I'm in the over-under. Yo.
As they travel across the world, they come across Uta's dead body. Now for my rules, I don't count any deaths that happened off screen way before the episode begins, which is why I didn't count Lenore in the first one and the skeletons in Treehouse 11. Now looking at poor Uta here, he does look a little decayed and obviously died way before the episode began, so for this reason I'm not adding him to the kill count. We also see Comic Book Guy being devoured by a mind flayer, which instantly explodes after doing so. It must have been all those tacos.
This should provide adequate sustenance for the Doctor Who marathon.
Carl and Lenny are also eaten. And poor old Gil is torn apart from the inside by branches. In the episode, Homer tortures 7 Demogorgons, including the one that looked like Flanders.
Howdly doodly, neighborino.
Next up is Heaven Swipes Right. While at a football game, a vendor throws a hot dog straight down Homer's throat, choking him to death. But when reaching heaven, he's told he's there too early and so sent back in a new body. As a result, Homer can now choose any body he wants, and anyone he chooses dies as a result.
Boom, he's dead.
So that means this football player dies. An interesting proposition. Whose body would you pick? If you've watched up until this point, write a name in the comments to show off, and I'll give you a little heart. But literally the next day, he ruins his new body with dozens of donuts.
You ruined that body in one night?
So for his next body, he chooses Super Nintendo Chalmers. But when he opens his paycheck, he has a heart attack at the low salary. But seeing as both Chalmers and Homer are dead, I won't be counting them again. The next body he takes is Mo Sislag, but instead of dying, Mo's soul is transferred into baby Maggie.
I'm very thirsty.
Ew.
In When Harry Met Slimy, Selma's love life takes a new green turn, falling in the arms or tentacles of Kang. While the two of them are getting on, the creature from the shape of water rises up, but they end up cooking him instead. Selma and Homer help the alien to escape, but when they're stopped by Mr. Burns and Smithers, Kang pops up and bites off Smithers' head. The army are then on pursuit, with Mr. Burns demanding to shoot the driver, and the dum-dum shoots their driver instead.
Not my driver.
Kodos meets them on top of Mount Springfield, ready to take them away back to their world. But before they can flee in a spaceship, Selma is shot by the military. So Kang pulls out his Infinity Gauntlet, turning 28 soldiers into dust. Also, there is no way to tell how many soldiers were in the tanks, but most modern tanks have 4-man crews. So with 5 tanks, let's add on an extra 20 kills. He then kills Mr. Burns with an empty trash can. After this, Kang brings Selma back to life, and last time I deducted her death from the kill count, and many of you said it should have stayed. So seeing as she did technically die, this time I am keeping it, just for you. Ending Treehouse of Horror 30 with 73 kills. Treehouse of Horror 31. The town of Springfield are voting for their next president, and so Marge calls up Homer to tell him he has to vote, and instead Homer decides to take a nap. In his dream, he is shown a list of every deplorable thing President Trump has done. When he wakes up, Marge scorns him for not voting, so Homer brushes it off by saying, "How bad can it be?" Well, quite bad actually, as America is now an apocalyptic hellhole. A Homeland Security robot then kicks Mole Man, sending him flying.
Oh, that's what I get for voting for Kanye.
Now there is an interesting fact about this episode. Initially, when first animated, it did not include the characters wearing masks. However, to reflect on the pandemic, showrunner Al Jean asked the director to have every character except Homer wearing a mask. We then go into our first segment, Toy Gory. By the way, I have to say, I love the CGI animation in this episode. It looks so good. Bart is choosing which toy to donate, but before doing so, he decides to torture them first. And if you thought Toy Story Sid was bad, you haven't seen the cruel and unusual punishment Bart delves out. Bart is given a brand new radioactive man doll, but when he talks to the other toys, he finds out he's not in safe hands. And he's absolutely right, as Bart does a Sergeant Sausage and throws Radioactive Man into a microwave where he blows up. In revenge for their fallen comrade, the other toys kidnap Bart and make him into a toy. They tear out his insides and replace it with Tinker Toys. And now he's completely brain dead. In Into the Homerverse, Homer accidentally brings in Homers from another dimension in his world, like Bear Version, Princess, Noir, 8-Bit, and Anime Homer.
Konnichiwa!
The other Homers soon start terrorizing the entire town by emptying buffets and over-bowling bowling alleys. When they empty out Krusty Burger, they bring in another alternative for meat, including poor old Gil. The episode continues its tradition of decapitating Ned, this time with a gun. When the Homers are about to return to their own world, they're stopped by Mr. Burns, who isn't so willing to give up cheap, undocumented labor. So he brings in his own versions of himself from other universes, and an all-out battle ensues. Original Homer is zapped to death, Bear Homer is blasted with a shotgun, 8-Bit Homer is burnt to death, Noir Homer is stabbed, Anime Homer is headbutted so hard his eyes explode, and Princess Homer dies after drinking poisoned beer. Now, this is where it's gonna get a little confusing. It looks like that Bear Homer didn't die, as we can see him here, and we see him again at the end of the episode.
Exit stage right.
And despite having his heart knifed out, Noir Homer is also alive and well at the end of the episode too. So just to avoid any arguments, I'm not counting those two deaths. I guess they survived, who knows? It's a cartoon at the end of the day, it doesn't make any sense. The final segment is B9 Rewind, a parody of the comedy horror Happy Death Day. In it, Lisa is celebrating her 9th birthday after being 8 years old for 3 decades. At her party, a car crashes into the house, killing her. She wakes up to find that the day has restarted, and in a Groundhog Day style, the day repeats itself all over again. When the car crashes into the living room again, she throws Milhouse in the way, where he goes soaring.
You killed the kid. You better do really well on the written portion.
Nelson tells her that he also relives the same day again. When Lisa gets excited about the possibilities, the treehouse falls on them both, killing them. Upon waking up, Lisa is immediately crushed under a collapsing ceiling, only for a mirror to fall on her head the next day. On the next repeat, Ralph is run over. When Nelson attempts to high-five Lisa, he falls out of the window into a wood chipper, and Lisa jumps in right after him. Next, we see Lisa blowing out her candles, only to set fire to herself and Nelson. When she blows them out in the next repeat, they are somehow impaled by a kitchen knife. Next, they're crushed under an air conditioner. Fed up with being killed, they turn to Comic Book Guy for some help. While here, they said they had given him 987 burritos, to which he replies to make it a nice round 1,000. Meaning that in order to give Comic Book Guy 1,000 burritos, they would have to die 1,000 times. So let's pump that number right up. In order to break the cycle, they do this by throwing a cinder block into Gil's car window, causing him to collide into a tree. Now breaking the loop, the two of them fade into oblivion. This ends Treehouse of Horror 31 with 1,027 kills. Treehouse of Horror 32. The episode starts with a Disney-inspired opening, and almost immediately, a cute little possum and a raccoon are killed. But without getting too pedantic, I'm only counting animals who play a character. We see Bart as Bambi and Milhouse as Thumper, being warned by Marge to shush as a hunter has entered the forest. This is right before Milhouse's head is blown completely off. Yikes. And then there is poor Al Frank, who is then shot out of a tree. Bart scarpers from suffering the same fate as his friend, and luckily for him, unlike the original Bambi, no mother dies here, because in this twist, the hunter is killed instead. Stag Homer comes along and impales Mr. Burns with his antlers before he and Lenny chow down on him. But I don't think they'll get too much meat out of this guy.
Why, thank you, Simpson. I have been watching my figure.
Maggie Simpson then flies onto the screen like Tinkerbell to reveal the title card. Even though Disney now owns The Simpsons, the creators aren't afraid to throw shade at their corporate overlords. They've been doing it for years.
I'm the mascot of an evil corporation.
Next up, we see the Simpsons family living in a flooded basement in a parody of the movie Parasite. In a sneaky little side gag, we can see a reference to Mr. Sparkle, as we can see a little detergent box from this season 8 episode.
Hey, he looks like you.
To escape from their damp dwellings, the family are then hired by the rich elite Rainier Wolfcastle to be his help. But the Simpsons family realise that there are others living in the mansion too.
Parasites! Jeez, how many people live down here?
Sideshow Mel then explains the allegory, emphasis on the gory, as Kirk grabs Mel's bones, which isn't as dirty as it sounds, and stabs him with it. This leads to an all-out brawl across the house, and amongst the chaos, Mr. Burns can be seen looking down from above, not a care in the world, while Smithers is stabbed in the back. But Monty Burns isn't safe for very long and becomes a victim to the mob. The next morning, there are bodies here, there, and everywhere. Supporting this scene right here, I counted 52 bodies in this picture. And I counted a further 29 bodies stacked up over here in this pile. Also during this segment, there's an itchy and scratchy short playing on TV called Doe Piercer, which is a reference to Bong Joon-ho's 2013 film Snowpiercer. In it, Itchy stabs Scratchy in the head. The next segment is called Nightmare on Elm Tree, and before you say it's been done before, no, this isn't a Freddy Krueger parody like in Treehouse 6. It opens with Bart telling his sisters spooky stories in the treehouse. Funny because this is the first time we see the Simpsons swapping tales in the treehouse since the very first special, hence the origin and the name, Treehouse of Horror. It only took us 31 years to get back here again. Anyway, scared of the stories, Lisa and Maggie run into their parents' room and ruin their snuggle time, which annoys poor frustrated Homer.
Every year, 3 scary stories. 2 of them good and a lame one in the middle.
Enraged by listening to these horror stories for over 30 years, he grabs his axe and attempts to chop down the tree, but a lightning bolt strikes, bringing it to life. After throwing Homer into the wall that luckily doesn't kill him, it strides into town where it finds people watching Guardians of the Galaxy at the drive-in.
You're real mature, laughing at a brain-damaged tree.
Offended, he throws a car containing Clancy and Sarah Wiggum through the screen. He then swats Frank miles and miles away. The tree then barks back to its legion of trees, awakening them with an aim to destroy humanity. When Kirk picks an apple, the tree rips his arm off, but seeing as we don't see him die here, we're not counting it as a kill, as this isn't his first rodeo, having lost his arm before.
I told that idiot to slice my sandwich. Ow!
As Ken Brockman reports on the vengeful trees, he is stabbed right through the chest by a tree trunk. The townsfolk stand ready to defend their own, threatening to chop the trees down. In defense, the trees shake their leaves to release pollen, causing everyone's allergies to flare up. When Willie sneezes, he accidentally chainsaws his arms off. And then they start killing everyone else, including Lenny.
Not Lenny!
Next up, Mo, Snake and Lou are impaled. Disco, Stu and Otto are killed next, and poor Hans Moleman gets a beehive stuck on his head. That little peanut cannot catch a break.
Oh no, my brains.
At the same time, poor little Ralph is sucked up into the branches. The trees then go on to massacre everyone else, and I counted 17 people right here, excluding the ones I mentioned before. The trees then pile the townsfolk onto Jebediah Springfield's statue, and they sing carols around the corpses. The final victim is Comic Book Guy, who is hacked apart by an axe. This segment is hugely reminiscent of Night of the Dolphin. It's got revenge, things that shouldn't march marching, battles, mobs, and impalements left, right, and center. And whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'll leave to your imaginations. Next up, we see Vincent Price reading a creepy book to Maggie for a bedtime story. In these stories, Bart is being a little brat and causing havoc, resulting in him slicing the heads off his entire family. Although this is a very short segment, I absolutely love this animation style. The Treehouse specials always allow the creators to experiment with different art styles that they just can't do with regular episodes. I also love the Edna's scene gazing at a picture of Woodrow, which is of course a callback to season 3's Bart the Lover. This segment ends with Maggie strangling Vincent Price with her toy. The final segment is Dead Ringer, a Ring-inspired parody, but instead of a videotape that kills you 7 days later after watching it, it's a TikTok video. The first kids to die are twins Sherry and Terry, who are beheaded.
I killed Jerry and Larry.
Milhouse is then stabbed in the back by 8 knives. To put a stop to the killings, Lisa vows to investigate, so she talks to groundskeeper Willie, who tells her the story of Mopey Mary, a second grader who was given rabbit droppings as a Valentine's Day gift, and so she threw herself into a well, staying undiscovered until 7 days later. To confront Mopey Mary, Lisa watches the video herself and demands to be killed right there and then.
So, come and get me now.
The dead girl then crawls out the TV when Lisa offers to be her friend, but Lisa's smothering friendship becomes way too much, and Mary soon prefers the cold damp darkness of the well to Lisa's clinginess, jumping straight back in all over again. This episode ends with Kang and Kodos complaining that they were crammed into the episode last minute. Since the very first Treehouse episode, the alien duo have appeared in every single Treehouse of Horror since. Sometimes they play a large role like in Citizen Kang.
It's a two-party system. You have to vote for one of us.
And sometimes they're crammed in last minute. Either way, their appearances are a staple of these specials, so it's no wonder they feel all high and mighty when it comes to Halloween. So, Treehouse of Horror 32 ends with 128 kills. So, we have finally come to the end of the video. Well done for sticking around. And the total kill count for all 32 seasons of the Treehouse of Horror is 3,100. And the award for best kill goes to Krusty the Clown getting grinded and mutilated by a wood chipper in Treehouse 19. But move over Krusty, these are the real MVPs of the Simpsons Theory channel, my patrons. We have Timothy, One Drummer Boy, Steve, Charlie, Sean, Stefan, Robert, Ashley, Glenford, Devin, Gadrak, Stephen, Edward, Anthony, Nicola, Jeffrey, Abby, Dominic, Cody, Chaz, Jeff, Gil, Shadu, Murray, Paul, Henry, Frank, Lucas Z, Omer, Eric, Thomas88, Samantha, Rayleigh, Laurent, Daniel, Brendan, Jessica, Shavendra, Holly, Jason, Molly, Jack, Doug, Eli, David, Ross, and Rachel.